18, 19. Really feels like it's about 80 degrees today. But as you can see to my left over here, we've got a newly planted orchard of peach trees in Peach County, Crawford, Macon, this middle Georgia area, where we have about 9,000 plus acres of peaches, the majority of the peach acres in the state. And this is the time of year, normally you think about colder weather and cooler temperatures. This is the time of year I tell everybody this is the perfect time to plant trees, shrubs, especially fruit trees. And this is a really good looking plant of peaches. But this month, we're not going to talk about peaches. We're actually here at Taylor Orchards in Taylor County, Georgia, and we are going to talk about apples that you can do in our area to maybe actually make a few, home garden apples, small fruit stand type planting. Some things you can do to be successful on some newer planted stuff, some newer varieties, newer rootstocks, and maybe some things you can do with what you have in your yard, right now, to make them a little more productive, a little easier to manage, and a little less, tough on pruning. So, yep, this month's talk is going to be a little bit about apples. All right, if any of you guys have called me and asked me about growing apples or pears, the first thing I'm going to talk about is variety selection. There's a couple reasons for variety selection that you need to think about it before you go out just to any old box store or any old nursery and buy an apple variety. One, all these apples you see in the grocery store nowadays, Jazz, Pink Lady, Honeycrisp, all of these apples, a lot of them taste good, a lot of them are, I'm sure they're your kids' favorites, but a lot of them will not do really well in Georgia, especially middle Georgia. Some of them are, suited to the northern areas of Georgia, but really in middle Georgia, we're kind of limited on varieties that we can grow. The other thing I'm going to tell you is you got to have a variety that has some resistance to fire blight. Fire blight's a bacterial disease. If you have Bradford pears in your yard, if you've ever grown apple trees, if you've ever grown pears, fire blight's a disease that you probably have already seen. You'll see in the springtime after bloom, you'll see shoot tips that kind of curl up, look burnt, look like they caught on fire. It's a bacterial disease, very hard to control in Georgia. I'll touch on it a little bit. It's very hard to control in Georgia, especially on apples and pears. So we always talk about a variety that's got some resistance. I'm not going to go into all the varieties right now. I'm mainly going to go into the growing of them and some things that have changed. But you definitely need to start off with varieties that have some sort of resistance. In pears, we have some varieties that have really good resistance. In apples, we don't really have a lot of good resistance, but we do have some that are not as susceptible. So in apples, I would say what you're looking for is an apple variety that's not as susceptible. Some of those in our area might be a Granny Smith, it might be a Fuji, something like that. Something that we can grow here, a Pink Lady, we could grow a Pink Lady, but Pink Lady is going to be highly susceptible to bacterial diseases like fire blight. So you're going to have to stay on a spray program, which when I talk about it, you'll see it's a pretty rigorous program. It's something that I don't think a lot of people in our area are going to do. The production system that we talk about normally in our area, we're normally talking about large trees, normal rootstocks, older rootstocks. These trees get big, they get gnarly, they grow really rapidly. You have, people always call me and ask about pruning these things, and they've got, 50 or 100 water sprouts going straight up in the air. There's no fruit and wood, and if there is fruit and wood, it's about 20 feet up, so you got, ladders to get up to get it, or you wait till it falls. If you're waiting till an apple or a pear falls, it's usually half rotten anyway. Someone's already chewed on it, birds have pecked it, squirrels will get it, so that's not the kind of thing we want. So these new varieties, these new rootstocks are something that you really should which you should really consider to try and put in your yard. There's a lot now that have dwarf rootstocks, semi-dwarf, extra dwarf. These things can be anywhere from a 12 to 15 foot tree, when it's mature. Even some of these you can keep as a 10 or 12 foot tree. And then still on that 10 or 12 foot tree, if you manage it right, you can produce a bushel or so of apples. So that's pretty important there. And then when you're thinking about varieties, you've always got to look at that pollination code. You want to have some pollination codes that overlap with some varying varieties. And if you can't find, a bunch of varieties that you like, or there's not a lot that you can use, then, something like a white flower crabapple would work well to pollinate across most any of these, the apple varieties that we would grow in this area. So something like that, planting crab apples intermittently, in between would help you out with pollination. So that's the three, pretty much the three key things. A variety that's going to work out here, be fairly resistant. I'm going to say go ahead and try and plan on buying some dwarf rootstocks, and hopefully when we talk about this a little more, you'll understand why. And then making sure your pollination codes overlap. Same thing with a lot of stuff like pecans. You want to make sure you have certain varieties, multiple varieties are going to cross pollinate, so you get plenty of pollen movement in that orchard. Peaches, they're self-fertile, so one tree is going to pollinate itself. In apples, it's not the same thing. They're not going to self-pollinate, so you got to have some different varieties in there, interplanted, or if you do, a couple of varieties, side by side, to make sure you get fruit. If you're going to put the effort in to keep the disease out and plant it, fertilize it, and keep it watered, you want to make sure at the end of the year you have some fruit. If we could sell a brown delicious to somebody, but nobody ever wanted a brown delicious, they always wanted a red delicious. We have some trouble here in the middle part of the state in hotter climates, really getting that red color on an apple. So, but we don't have there's not a lot more varieties. Nobody's breeding varieties for this part of the country. So we have to, kind of grow the varieties that people are growing elsewhere. But one thing we can do, one thing that's kind of changed the apple industry is, we can look at rootstocks. There are a lot of different rootstocks, and I'm not going to go into all of them because I'd say something wrong. There's some M9s and M varieties. There's Budwood. There's certain things like Geneva and things like this, and they have different characteristics and they're used differently on these different apple varieties. The Geneva, which is this apple variety right here, is a Gale Gala. It's on a Geneva rootstock. The Geneva rootstock is actually resistant to fire blight. So, if this thing got hit by fire blight, it could kill the tree all the way down to the rootstock. Rootstock would still live, which really ain't gonna help you out, but at least your rootstock's gonna live and it's not gonna get hit with fire blight. So keeping this upper part of the tree sprayed, will keep that tree alive. But this is a dwarf tree, and this is set up on a trellis, and you don't have to set up a trellis if you're gonna plant apple trees in your yard. But I'm just kind of showing you this to explain a few things about how we need to grow these things. And even our normal varieties that are more vigorous, not on dwarf and rootstocks, the same techniques, hold true for those two. We have a lot of apples, pears around this area, and like I said, a lot of them, you've got this really upright, vigorous growth. All right, when you have upright, vigorous growth, like I've talked about in a lot of other shows on fruit trees, when you get that really upright, fast growth, you don't get fruit buds. You don't get flower buds. Right here, all this right here, from here to here, those are all leaf buds. So all that's going to be is leaf tissue right there. Down here, you've got 1, 2, 3 flower buds, and they're kind of like called spurs. And this is another flower bud here. So what you want to do in these dwarf varieties, while we have them on a trellis, is you want to basically take these limbs and pin them to here, so that this limb lies flat. This limb lying flat will force these along this stem, will force flower buds to be pushed out right here. You'll have more flower buds here, and what will happen is you will get flowers and fruit production on this spur for multiple years without this growing. This won't grow very far that way because it doesn't. You've taken all of the vigor out of it by laying it flat. So same thing here. In this situation, because we're kind of narrow in our rows and we don't want to hit it with a tractor, you wouldn't leave this out here. So what we would do is we do one of two things. We'd either cut it off, or we would bring it to here and pin it down or tape it down to this trellis wire. By laying it flat, you force it to, this next year, you'll force it to produce more flower buds. And on those flower buds won't really grow. The spurs won't really grow. They'll just continuously put flower buds after flower buds. So for multiple years, you'll produce fruit at each one of these little spurs. Another thing that's important on these trees like this is in all trees really, and something we don't do, but in this system is to get this main leader, get this central leader steadied, whether you staked it, whether you tied it here, taped it here. By steadying that and not letting it wiggle back and forth, you let this tree put diameter on the trunk and in the main leader. So the main leader in the trunk will grow stronger more rapidly. If you leave it free and let it just fly back in the wind, it's going to use its energy trying to, stay upright, and so it can't put energy back in the trunk. So it's not going to grow diameter or caliper very quick. Now, one thing you'll see on this tree, and it's going to be the same thing on any of our apple repairs, is you've got basically where it was cut last year is right here, and it put out a shoot here and 2 shoots right below it. And what you want in an apple tree is you want a central leader or a central stem. So you're going to have to make a decision what you want to do with this. Now, since these are a good distance away from this upper stem, you probably could just take this and leave this as your central leader. Attach this to this trellis wire, and then take these 2 limbs and bend these 2 limbs down. Go ahead and tape these to here. This following year, they won't grow. They won't grow this way like a muscadine vine. You do this with a muscadine vine, it's going to grow, off the screen. But with this apple tree, you pin it down here, and all along this shoot, you're going to have spurs or flower buds produced. Following year, you'll have fruit being produced there. So really on these dwarf trees, you don't do a lot of pruning. You don't do a lot of pruning. You just do a lot of staking and tying and laying flat. As the apple guys say, they would say this is a very calm tree. It doesn't have a lot of this upright, vigorous water sprout stuff. And in these dwarf trees, it's hard to find, trees that are going to have a lot of this upright growth, a lot of this stuff that doesn't have fruit and wood on it. These were planted last winter. This is the second year, they're going into the second year, and the apple specialists that have looked at this planting have said that we need to try and put a crop on these things this year, and this will just keep them in check. Most of the time, on fruit trees, I tell people, you probably don't want to crop them the first year, second year, because you want to let that tree grow and get some size to it. But on these trees, you can actually do that to help slow down the growth. And even on a more vigorous apple tree that's not a dwarfing rootstock, you probably could go ahead and the first or second year, go ahead and let there be a crop on it. That would help keep some of the vigor out of it. It helped keep some of the water sprouts from shooting up. Now on our non-dwarfing rootstock stuff, when they're growing, if you do this, if you do lay these limbs more horizontal to the ground, you're still going to get some water sprouts. They're just a lot more vigorous tree. We have warm climates, warm temperatures. They're going to grow a lot more rapidly, a lot more vigorously. So you'll do a lot more pruning. In these, you don't have to do any pruning. Once you take the vigor out by laying it flat, it's going to stay like that. And you don't have to do much until a few years later when these limbs get bigger. And as these limbs get close to half the size of this main stem, that's when you're going to be looking at removing this and letting the next shoot come on out. That's what they'll tell you. With this kind of system, you have all these limbs are semi-permanent. They're permanent until you decide you're through with them and you got something better coming behind it. And it doesn't hurt to have multiple limbs in the same area, so you can actually do that with with the limbs to keep them out of the way. Now if this is just in your yard, you can actually stake it with a large T-post, and you could use tape of some sort. They make horticultural tape. You could tape this limb and then tape it to the T-post to keep this limb flat. What you'll find though on a non-staked or non-trellis tree is if this thing puts 1 apple on it, that's gonna hold it flat anyway. One thing to consider though is if as you get lower here, you're gonna be probably putting herbicides around to kill weeds. You don't want a bunch of low limbs because you'll be hitting them with Roundup or whatever else you're spraying. Whether you think you're hitting them with it, you're gonna be hitting them with it. So that's other things to consider. All right, I talked a little bit a minute ago about staking or tying, the limbs to like a T-post. As you tree, they did that, but they didn't stake it to the T-post. And this is something you can do. I don't know that I'd really recommend it because you end up with a bunch of things tied to the trunk. But you can actually tie these limbs down to lay them flat by tying them to the tree that it's on. Pull it down, tie it. This is horticultural tape. It won't girdle the stems or anything. But one thing I wanted to point out too, and this is with anything you buy, from a nursery, it helps to buy quality trees. So I mean, you look at this tree, and I don't know, I'm not an apple expert, but this tree just looks nice. You got a good central leader. You got all these, all these lateral branches that are spaced around the tree, in a nice manner. I mean, there's not branches all over each other, all over the top of each other. Now I'm gonna go over here and show you another tree. Look at this tree compared to that last one. You have a decent central leader, probably just because I'm broke out of here. You got this growth coming here. You only have 2 stems coming, And this is a little less morphine rootstock on this than what we saw over there in the last tree I showed you. So you see you got this really upright, really this stem that's trying to take over dominance from this main stem. So you want to go ahead and take this off, unless you were in a situation like this where you could lay it down. But really, this coming year you're not going to get any kind of production out of that. I would come in here and take this thing out. I think I've got some on here. I would probably come in here and take this thing out because it's so close to our main stem, and leave a little nub, which will, it's called a Dutch cut, but I'm not going to get too technical. You leave a little nub where you cut it, and it should force a bud out below it that will give us another fruiting stem. Like I said, I would lay this one down like this. But in this kind of situation, this production system, maybe not so much in your home garden, you really want more. You want more growth on this stem. You need more fruiting wood come off here. This is going to be your leader, so you would want to stake this straight. If you can't get this thing to lay down flat, you might even take it off. But one thing you can do is something called scoring, and you can do this with a lot of other trees. Not going to get too technical, but auxins are produced up here. They come down the stem, so whenever you prune, it cuts off those auxins, so those buds below it they're not suppressed by the auxin. It lets them, the buds break. They produce stems, which produce, new growth. Same kind of thing can happen down here when you do something like scoring. As long as you're above this graft union, which this is what this is. So you've got your root stock here and your tree here, your apple variety. But you can do something called scoring, where you've got your bud here. You want this thing to grow out here, so you can come in here and cut a little notch just to get through the layer of the bark above that bud. And you do want to cut it. They say it's really good to use like a little hacksaw and to have a little ridge, but if you cut a little bit out of that bark right there, that'll heal up, and it cuts off the flow of auxins from above it, and hopefully this bud right here will push out. Right here, you get some more fruiting wood for the next year. Same thing you could do up here. Since you're going to lay these down, they're not going to be competing. You could come in here where you've got some buds. You can score this wood and get growth of these buds below there, get new fruiting wood. All right, so we're going to cut this tree, kind of shape it up a little bit. And this is one of those that one of our specialists was down a few weeks ago. He said this is one of these that makes him mad because it's got so much going on that it kind of, you don't really know what to do to start with. First off, what I do is anything coming from below your graft union, if I can cut it with that, cut that off, because all that's doing is taking away from the energy going into the main trunk. Then you've got these right here that are, like I said, these upright growing shoots with fruit and wood on it, and it's pretty low, meaning it's in that area where you're going to accidentally hit it with the weed whacker, you're going to hit it with herbicide. So I'd go ahead and cut that off, these off. Ooh, that's the wire. So that was pretty good recovery. Now, you got a good central leader. What you want to do here is a lot of these in here are not going to be any good. So I mean, you just look at what you're going to have here. You could go ahead and you could tie these down. You could tie this down. Since you're not going to be on a trellis, you've got these arranged really well. You might even want to take a few of these little limbs off. Then I might come in here, do the same thing with this to lay it flat. All these small shoots will probably never amount to anything. So you could take a lot of these off just to open it up. And then I probably would come in here and score some of these buds somewhere on this shoot to get some growth up here, because once these kind of get down here and you got this one down here, then you don't have anything up here. So you got a lot of area on this tree that could produce fruit. So you might want to score it twice there to get a little bit of spread there, and have some more areas for fruit. And you can see on here on this tree this year, this thing was kind of laying flat a little bit. So you've got a couple flower buds, a couple spurs where you'll have some fruit. And anytime you have fruit on these limbs, it's going to take a lot out of that limb too. So it's going to slow down the growth as well. And on this limb, if you want to use this as one of your structural limbs for the future, down the road, if you want that to be an actual limb that you keep, you know, it might be that you end up taking some of these fruit off because that is a pretty small limb. And you think about even a small apple, you get a couple of them on there, you know, it's going to weigh it down pretty good. All right, so, you know, it's January, and whether you're going to plant peach trees or you're going to plant apple trees or whatever you decide to plant plums, you know, kind of the first three things I talked about, or a couple of the first things I talked about are key. You know, make sure you pick a variety that's suited to our area. Make sure you know what you're getting into when you plant whatever fruit tree you decide to plant. And I mean, honestly, one of the easiest things to do is look around you. If somebody's not doing it commercially, it's probably because it's pretty tough to do in your area. So, you know, we've got some small scale apple stuff going on in Middle Georgia. A few of our peach growers are growing some, but I wouldn't say that we have a huge industry in the Middle Georgia area right now. You know, if you're going to plant a few, you know, plant the right varieties, plant some that are going to pollinate with them, but don't expect to be, you know, in the apple business, you know, in a couple years. You know that there could be some failures and there could be some tough times. And one thing I didn't talk about is that fire blight spray program. And just on, you know, in a nutshell, you know, you spray copper fungicides for fire blight, starting prior to bloom. You spray 2 times with that, and then there's some other bactericides that are non-toxic to bees. Because copper's toxic to bees. That you spray during bloom on susceptible varieties, you know, every 3 days. And if you do that, then you could possibly escape fire blight in a year where you have bad fire blight outbreaks or bad, you know, weather that's conducive to fire blight. So, not a lot of people want to spray, you know, 2 times prior to bloom and then, you know, twice a week basically until bloom's over. And that's what you got to do if, you know, you want to control fire blight on some of these really susceptible varieties. Like I said, if you're going to plant, you know, give us a call. Go on our website, look up, you know, if you're going to plant apples, go out there and look at University of Georgia home apple production. It's got some good variety selection, shows you the crop pollination codes, and shows you where they are recommended in the plant hardiness zones in Georgia. So, you know, at least if you're planting a good variety that's resistant and suited to our area, you know, it starts you off on the best foot. And always take a soil sample before you even think about putting the tree in the ground. And make sure you buy a good, healthy, quality looking tree. With that being said, I'm Jeff Cook. If you got suggestions, comments, you know, give me a call at one of my offices or email me, and you know, maybe I'll talk about what your comments are on my next show. But I'm Jeff Cook, Backyard Basics, where we're filmed in your backyard.